When time travel is ultimately found in 2074, it is promptly outlawed and used exclusively by those on the black market, because it is now hard to dispose of remains due to tracking technologies. A group of criminals begin sending their victims to 2044 in order to kill and dispose of them. The individuals who carry out the killings are referred to as loopers, and once the victim has passed away, they can examine their corpse to discover the payoff in silver bars. Closing the loop refers to the syndicate's plan to send a looper back in time to be slain by their younger selves, if he lives until 2074. To signal the conclusion of the contract, this payment is made in gold bars. In this universe as well, 10% of people have a mutation that grants them telekinesis. However, their abilities are limited to making tiny objects levitate. Looper Joe sits in a farm outside from the city in 2044, keeping track of the minutes on his pocket watch. Joel murders the person from the future who emerges out of nowhere. After that, he takes the body to an abandoned factory with his silver and sets it on fire. He then uses the silver to buy more ammunition at the Looper headquarters. Despite living in a dubious area, Joe manages to drive his luxury car without any worry. While riding, he encounters Seth, a coworker, who is brandishing a gun to intimidate the man who broke his bike. Joe offers to give him a ride, and all the way there, Seth continues to demonstrate his telekinesis with a penny. When the pair arrives at the club, their Looper status grants them exclusive entrance through the rear. Joe goes to see his sweetheart Suzy, who works in the wicked industry. A group of Loopers congregate in a hidden chamber to observe a colleague who just killed his future self. The man says they have to celebrate without seeming disturbed. The Loopers use eye drops, which are illegal uppers. While having fun and partying all night, Joe nearly runs over a child while driving through the town, but he stops in time. Joe keeps working as usual for the following few days, murdering people in the future to obtain his silver. However, because too many loops have just been closed, there is discontent among his coworkers. Joe is awakened one night by a persistent knock on his window. When he opens it, he is startled to see Seth running inside, breaking bad news. The man was singing a song from Seth's early years, when his most recent assignment arrived from the future. When Seth took the bag off his head, he saw that he was this person. Old Seth clarified that Rainmaker, a new crime boss in the future, is cutting off all connections. After present Seth released the man's hands, old Seth took advantage of the opportunity to go, leaving young Seth immobilized and unable to murder his future self. Seth is now in trouble because it is against the regulations to let your assignment escape. When armed syndicate members begin beating on the door, Joe allows Seth to hide with his silver in the hidden compartment in the floor. Then Joe opens the door, letting a gang of men inside who are led by Kid Blue. When they are unable to locate Seth at the apartment, Kid Blue drives Joe back to the club. Joe calls Kid Blue childish for playing with his gun as they wait, and Kid Blue responds by pointing the gun at Joe. Kid Blue accidentally fires when a door opens and strikes him in the head. Joe is then brought to see Abe, the future man who established the current syndicate branch. If Joe refuses to give up Seth, Abe threatens to seize half of his silver reserves. Joe is hesitant at first, but then he tells Abe the truth after recalling a dream he had to flee this horrible town. Older Seth keeps running as Abe's men go to complete the operation, and he observes scars developing on his arm that indicate he has to report to an address in 15 minutes. In an attempt to flee, he begins to scale a fence, but in the process, he loses his nose, signifying that Abe's men are torturing his past self. After finding a car and driving to the specified place, older Seth's leg also vanishes, causing him to wreck the vehicle. As he pulls his body to the right door, his other leg similarly vanishes, and he emerges, only to be shot by Kid Blue. Young Seth ultimately passes away on the torture table behind Kid Blue. Joe sees Suzy in the interim and begs for consolation while confessing to his closest friend what he did, not feeling good about it. Suzy declines his offer of half of his silver since she is aware that Looper silver has conditions. When Joe returns home later, he discovers Seth's blood. When he visits the farm the following day for his next assignment, he is shocked to see how late they are. Suddenly, a man without a rope or bag shows up. When Joe recognizes that this is his former self, he freezes, allowing the older Joe time to change his mind. When young Joe pulls the trigger, the bullet hits the man's back bars, proving that they are made of gold. Old Joe punches and throws a bar at young Joe, knocking him out while the latter refuels. A few hours later, young Joe wakes up by himself and discovers a letter that reads, "Hop a train out of town and run," in his pocket. Joe disregards this and leaves for the city, breaking his phone en route to his apartment, where he discovers it completely disorganized with the door open. He runs for cover when he hears voices, and discovers Kid Blue has taken all of his silver. Joe watches for the ideal opportunity, then lunges at Kid Blue to force him into the compartment and shut the lid. Joe attempts to escape via the window by jumping through Kid Blue's open fire, but more of Ub's men show up. Regretfully, he trips and falls onto a car, losing consciousness. Joe actually does kill his future self in a different timeline. After his contract expires, he parties around the world and develops into a severe addict. He eventually runs out of money and must begin working as a hitman in order to support his way of life. This indicates that he resumes killing and even detonates bombs in several cities. He ages throughout time and transforms into future Joe. 23 years after closing the loop, he gets the finger from a stunning woman he meets at a party. But after 2 years, they are contentedly wed. Joe is now clean because of her help in overcoming his addiction and his hitman days. After 5 years, the crimes of the Rainmaker are widely reported in the media. One morning as Joe wakes up, he notices an odd number scrawled on his hand. All of a sudden, a group of guys walk into his home. They are members of the syndicate, and they are there to capture Joe because they need to close the loop since it is 2074. Joe gives up easily, and as the house burns down, he is carried away. Subsequently, in an abandoned structure, Joe waits for the soldiers to encircle him before engaging in combat and quickly taking down each of them. He makes sure to choke the last one, looks at his watch picture of his wife one final time, and then uses the time machine to travel back in time to 2044. In the alternate universe, an elderly Joe makes an appearance, snatches his gun, and kills his younger self. Using his revolver as a threat rather than making a payment, he visits a store to acquire food and medication. Then, he begins to see images of little Joe, smashing the phone in his recollections. Old Joe begins chasing his younger self, who is making a return visit to his residence. By acting on these visions, Old Joe waits for the man in the automobile to turn away because he knows that Ub's men are nearby before shooting him. After stealing the man's gun, he heads to the apartment complex, where young Joe is escaping by the fire escape. Old Joe shoots the man in the flat to kill him as his younger self collapses, and he then drags young Joe away. Abe receives the news quickly, dismisses Kid Blue from the case, and he and his other men devise a scheme to apprehend both Joes. Shortly after, young Joe finds himself awake and alone at the train station, but he still won't go. Old Joe, in the meantime, breaks into the library and looks up numbers on a computerized database. He creates a map showing the locations of the 3 potential children, who could be Rainmaker based on those figures. A few scars on his arm beg him to meet at a restaurant as he is leaving. When Old Joe returns to the diner the following day, he sees his younger self there, his arm covered in bandage, indicating that he conveyed the message. They each order the same dish, and Old Joe tells how his wife supported him through his darkest days, and kept him from becoming addicted. She was killed by the men when they observed her by the window on the day the syndicate arrived at his home. The men chased Old Joe down immediately when he reached for her. Old Joe then begins discussing the Rainmaker, who is responsible for future vagrant purges and mass murders. He took over the 5 main syndicates in just 6 months, yet there are suspicions that he operates alone. His true identity and face are unknown to everyone. Before passing away, Joe's looper acquaintance called the Rainmaker to provide him with the odd numbers as a clue. The Rainmaker is closing all of the loops. Using the map, Old Joe explains to his younger self that he has come to kill the Rainmaker while he is still a child in an attempt to change history and save his wife. Young Joe tells the elderly man that he will get remarried in order to protect his wife because he won't take part in this. When young Joe lunges for his rifle, Old Joe kicks him in the groin and strikes him in the neck to take him down because he won't give her up. Old Joe utilizes his alternate identity as a shield to shoot the attackers as they approach at the exact moment Ub's soldiers emerge from the outside. When a shootout breaks out, Old Joe drops him and instructs his younger self to flee. Young Joe seizes the opportunity to rip a section of the map off as he falls. Then, young Joe starts shooting at his elder self as well, pushing him to flee by jumping out of a window. Kid Blue soon shows up with more guys, and the 2 of them begin following Old Joe through the fields. However, Joe is too quick and soon loses them. Young Joe then hurries to steal a hover bike and flee through the fields as the group turns on him. After a few minutes, he hops off the bike to let Ub's men follow an abandoned car. He then pulls out the portion of the map and finds a designated location. Joe finds Sarah living alone on a farm with her son Sid shortly after arriving at the place shown on the map. Joe chooses to hide in the field for the time being when Sarah, seeing him lurking around, emerges with a weapon and threatens to kill anyone who approaches her house. After spending hours observing the mansion, he quickly begins to experience withdrawal symptoms. In the meantime, Abe grabs Kid Blue's revolver, chastises him for his failure, and uses a hammer to break his hand. Sarah opens fire when she hears a disturbance outside in the evening, and notices an enigmatic figure approaching. When she stumbles on her way back, Joe emerges from hiding to assist. When he notices Joe's weapon, the enigmatic man reveals out to be only a hobo. Joe finally passes out at that point and throws up, but Sarah smacks him to keep him from fainting. Sid emerges as well, and offers him some of his water. Old Joe needs to hide in the sewers since the police are searching for both of them back in the city. He starts to have visions of Sarah and her slap, so in an effort to forget her, he focuses on the photo of his wife. Joe wakes up in the barn handcuffed the following morning. Sarah approaches him, asks him to leave, hands him the keys, and holds him at gunpoint. Sarah is shocked when Joe declines and shows her the map with the numbers. She gives him a quick jab in the shoulder and demands an answer, leaving an indentation on old Joe in the process. Joe just needs to tell Sarah that his former self wanted to harm her son because she already understands what a looper is. In response, Sarah says that the numbers correspond to Sid's birthday and the hospital's medical code from the time of his birth. She says that old Joe will be seeing each child individually because 2 more babies were delivered in that hospital on that particular day. Meanwhile, old Joe discovers the first child, whom he shoots after giving it some thought. After that, he quickly leaves the house and stops for a moment to lose it. He killed a child for no reason at all since nothing in his memory is changing. Joe escapes via an alley to cause the truck to collapse in the evening when Ub's men spot him and begin hunting him around the city. Kid Blue uses a radio in a dimly lit building to listen in on police communications and discovers Joe's whereabouts. Going back to Sarah, she allows young Joe to stay for additional safety and takes care of his injuries. Sid demonstrates to Joe that he has connected to small frog toys after she goes to sleep so that Joe and Sarah can notify one another in the event of an emergency. Joe is shocked to learn that Sid remembers his birth mother, who passed away when he was a kid, and that Sarah isn't his biological mother. Sid is upset that he was unable to stop it. Joe tells Sarah what Sid said, and offers her one of the frogs the following morning. Sarah reveals that she is Sid's mother, but that she left him on this farm with her sister in order to provide him with a better life, because she had a difficult life in the city. Sid was raised believing his aunt to be his biological mother. Joe suggests that she speak with Sid about this, but Sarah chastises him. Sarah is teaching Sid algebra in the afternoon when he suddenly loses it, and tells her that she isn't his mother, and that she must stop lying to avoid being killed as well. He then pushes Sarah, and as his rage grows, it becomes apparent that he possesses a very potent kind of telekinesis. Sarah flees to a safe to wait for Sid to stop screaming while the house trembles. Sid apologizes after Sarah checks on him later. At that precise moment, there is a tap on the door. When Sarah answers, it is Jesse, one of Ub's guys, posing as a police officer and looking for criminals. To avoid suspicion, Sarah is forced to let him in, and Joe hides behind the couch in case he is needed. He attempts to gesture for Sid to return when he sees him coming downstairs. Regardless, Sid runs to the kitchen and makes a deliberate noise as he descends. Jesse dashes to the kitchen as well, but Sid hides in the cabinet beneath the stairs after emerging through the other door. Joe follows him, and with the help of a hidden tunnel in the cabinet, the two of them emerge outside after a short while. They wait for Jesse to depart before meeting up with Sarah again. Old Joe, in the meantime, travels to a different spot on the map and is horrified to see that the second child is Susie's son. He still has happy memories of her and finds it difficult to act. After Joe stays outside the apartment for a time, the security cameras record him, and Kid Blue soon sees the clip. Later that evening, Sarah experiences fear and loneliness. Joe visits her room after she calls him using the frog, and they engage in inappropriate behavior together. When they're through, Sarah uses her lighter to float, demonstrating her own telekinesis. She sheds tears as she acknowledges the shame she experienced for leaving Sid with her sister. Joe finds Sarah being held at gunpoint by Jesse. When he walks downstairs the following morning, Joe gives in to force Jesse to release Sarah, but just as they are about to walk out the door, Sid appears on the steps and trips. When Jess's gun and everything else in the room start to levitate due to telekinesis, Sarah rushes to get Joe out of the house. Without any injuries, Sid hits the floor. He then uses his powers angrily to make Jesse float as well, yelling until the entire chamber bursts. Joe understands that Sid will turn into the rainmaker, and that Sid's power will allow him to take down entire syndicates by himself. Set on Sarah's deception, he pushes her, furious, but she tells him Sid isn't a horrible kid, he just loses control when he gets terrified. That's how he accidentally set off an explosion that killed Sarah's sister. Joe ignores her pleas and goes in search of Sid, discovering him drenched in blood in the field. Upon observing his battered visage, Joe chooses to console him rather than murder him. Joe then informs Sarah that she needs to prepare for her escape because Jesse must have told the others about him. Coming full circle, old Joe finally has enough and storms into Susie's apartment, pushing her out of the way in an attempt to locate the child. But when he goes inside the kid's room, Kid Blue uses a taser to knock him out. Joe is escorted by Kid Blue to the club, where Abe is organizing his men for the farm. Joe takes advantage of Kid Blue's argument with the guard to launch an assault. He shoots Kid Blue with his own rifle after pushing him back and kicking the guard. Then he begins shooting every guard, taking another rifle from the adjacent room and eliminating them all in a matter of minutes. He then uses a secret tunnel to enter the club and kill more crooks while hurling a bomb in the center of it to disable the security system. Abe is frightened to hear Joe at the door in the rear room. A short while later, Kid Blue awakens to discover that everyone in the club has died, including Abe. On the map, he can also see where the farm is located, though. A few minutes later, old Joe drives up to the property in a car loaded of gold bars and asks his younger self to get out by throwing him one. When little Joe resists and starts to fire, Kid Blue runs him over with a hover bike. When Kid Blue runs out of bullets from their exchange of gunfire, Joe waits for him to get near enough to shoot him off, causing the bike to crash. Joe becomes aware that his former persona has vanished after the smoke clears. As Sarah and Sid leave the house in their pickup, they discover that older Joe has blocked the road. Sarah picks her speed in an attempt to run him over as he starts fire. When Sid loses control, he utilizes his abilities to make the truck float upward and land upside down. Joe pursues the two survivors as they flee across the field, firing repeatedly until a bullet almost brushes Sid's cheek. The child starts to use his abilities once more, sending Sarah and Joe skyrocketing and hitting the younger Joe with a shockwave as he gets closer. Sarah, who is in a dire situation, starts speaking tenderly to her baby and expressing her love for him. Sid quickly gains composure and stops using his powers. When old Joe lifts his gun and prepares to fire, Sarah rushes to join Sid and serves as a shield. As young Joe witnesses this, he realizes that Sid will become the rainmaker because of the trauma caused by old Joe shooting Sarah. Young Joe chooses to self-delete in order to finally escape the cycle of retaliation, which causes old Joe to vanish. Sarah then tends to Sid's wound and puts him to bed. She then goes back to the event area and discovers that all of the bars have been left there. She takes Joe's watch and bids him farewell for good.